My dear friends, my fellow lovers of literature and cinema, welcome once again to this circle where stories are not simply consumed but unfolded, layer by layer, until their hidden architecture reveals itself. Tonight, I want to speak of a film that surprised me. Not because it promised spectacle, which Jason Statham films often do, but because it offered something different. When I first heard the title A Working Man, 2025, it struck me as simple, almost plain, yet within that simplicity was a promise. That this was not going to be another hyper-stylized action romp, but a story grounded in something elemental. And indeed it was. What we witness here is not the glossy assassin of the beekeeper, nor the unstoppable force of the transporter. Instead, we see Statham inhabiting Levon Cade, a man who once carried the weight of war on his shoulders as a Royal Marine, and who now carries the weight of anonymity as a construction worker. And yet, anonymity is never permanent for men like Levon. Pasts have a way of clawing their way back, demanding attention. What makes this film so riveting is not simply the inevitability of violence returning, but the quiet, almost tender exploration of what it means to build a life after destruction, to craft a second identity when the first refuses to die. Watching unfold, I felt less like I was seeing an action thriller and more like I was reading a modern fable. A tale about the impossibility of burying one's past, the cost of violence even when used for good, and the strange dignity of man who wants nothing more than to work, to live, to provide, yet who is pulled back into darkness. The title itself is symbolic. A working man, someone ordinary, invisible, overlooked, yet in that invisibility lies both power and vulnerability. Levon Cade becomes both myth and metaphor, a stand-in for all who have tried to move beyond their scars but find the world unwilling to let them. There is something almost biblical in the way the story begins. A man attempting to build, to hammer, to shape wood and stone into stability, only be reminded that the world is not built for peace. A kidnapped girl, a desperate plea, a return to violence. These are not mere plot beats, but allegories for how no man can remain untouched by the world's demand for action. And as Statham embodies his character, we see not just fists and weapons, but weariness, hesitation, even tenderness. He is not invincible. He is tired, scarred, yet determined. For me, what makes this introduction so compelling is that it reflects a question we all carry. Can we ever truly escape what shaped us? Can the soldier become only a worker, the fighter only a builder? Or does the past cling to us like shadow, waiting for the right moment to remind us of who we once were? In Levon Cade, we find not just Jason Statham the action star, but Jason Statham the myth carrier, the archetype of the reluctant warrior who longs for silence but cannot find it. So, as we begin this exploration, I invite you to see beyond the fists and the fire. To read this story as you would a novel, searching for motifs, for recurring symbols, for quiet truths stitched into the loudness of action. A working man is not just about saving a girl or defeating villains. It is about the impossibility of escape, the dignity of labor, and the paradox of violence used in service of peace. It is about the shadow each of us carries in the fight, sometimes noble, sometimes tragic, to live in spite of it. The film begins not with gunfire or chase, but with quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, the quiet of a man who has walked through storms and now clings to routine as though it were salvation. Levon Cade, played by Jason Statham, is introduced not as a mythic fighter, but as a builder. We see him with tools in hand, sweat on his brow, hammering wood, lifting beams. His life, on the surface, is humble, stripped down, ordinary. And yet, even in these early scenes, the camera lingers on his eyes that betray history, that tell us this man has seen more than any construction site could ever reveal. The first half of A Working Man unfolds as a study of contrast. Levon is a man who craves invisibility, but the world refuses to let him fade. His neighbors whisper about his past. His co-workers sense something harder beneath his calm, and though he tries to live in anonymity, the aura of a soldier or a fighter clings to him. Statham's performance is deliberate here, less about explosive movement, more about silence, about the way his shoulders carry weight even when he stands still. It is through the introduction of a young girl that the plot begins to stir. She is not presented dramatically at first, just a child on the periphery of Levon's routine. A fleeting smile exchanged, a small kindness shown, and already the threads of connection are woven. But this girl is not simply another background figure. She becomes the trigger for Levon's return to violence. When she is kidnapped, taken not by random chance but by forces of greed and cruelty, Levon is forced to step out of his chosen anonymity. What was meant to be a life of labor, of quiet building, collapses into the old rhythm. Tracking, fighting, rescuing. The journey to find her is not immediate spectacle. The film allows us to see Levon wrestle with himself. He knows what it means to return to this world of blood and shadows. He knows that every act of violence awakens a man he has tried to bury. Yet, what choice does he have? Here lies one of the first philosophical tensions of the film. Is violence justified when it is the only path to save innocence? Or does every act of violence, no matter how noble, stain the one who commits it? The first half of the story carries us through Levon's reawakening. We see him confront old instincts, how easily he can slip back in precision, how naturally his body remembers the motions of combat. Yet we also see hesitation. He is not the unbreakable machine of earlier Statham roles. He is human, scarred, reluctant. Each punch, each decision carries the weight of consequence. The film lingers on his face after fights, showing exhaustion rather than triumph. This vulnerability transforms the narrative from simple action to moral exploration. Along the way, the world around Levon is revealed as corrupt, brittle, and unforgiving. The construction company itself, once a place of refuge, is entangled in darker dealings. The villains here are not cartoonish masterminds, but men of power who exploit labor, who commodify innocence, who see violence as currency. Against them, Levon is not only a fighter but a symbol, a man who insists on dignity in a world that denies it. Symbolism threads through the first half. The hammer Levon wields on construction sites becomes a motif, representing creation rather than destruction, yet he is forced to wield other tools, guns, fists, knives, that undo rather than build. The juxtaposition is deliberate. The man who wants to create is dragged back into a role of destruction. Even the settings reflect this tension. Work sites filled with unfinished structures echo Levon's unfinished attempt at peace, while dim warehouses where violence erupts represent the shadows of his past. By the midpoint, the tension reaches a critical turn. Levon has tracked down the girl's captors, confronted some, fought others. He has spilled blood again, despite his reluctance. And yet, the girl is not yet free. Worse, his actions have drawn attention, not just from those he opposes, but from those who remember him, those who know the myth beneath the man. His anonymity is shattered. His attempt at being just a working man is gone. In its place rises the soldier once more, whether he wishes it or not. The first half closes with Levon battered but resolute. He stands at the edge of decision. To retreat back into silence, abandoning the fight, or to fully embrace the path of violence one more time, knowing it will cost him the peace he craves. The girl's absence leaves no real choice. He steps forward, not as a worker but as a warrior reborn, his hammer exchanged for fists of steel. The storm is coming, and he is willing to face it. The second half of A Working Man abandons hesitation. Where the first half showed Levon Cade wrestling with his reluctance, the second half is where he surrenders to inevitability. The rescue mission is no longer a possibility but a necessity, and every step forward drags him deeper into the world he once escaped. The girl's abduction, once seen as a single crime, reveals itself to be part of a darker network. Levon uncovers connections, human trafficking rings, corruption among those meant to protect, layers of violence concealed beneath everyday life. Each discovery deepens the despair, but also sharpens his purpose. The soldier within him, dormant for years, is awake now, and though he tries to retain fragments of humanity, with every fight, every interrogation, every body left behind, he feels the old darkness pulling him in. Action sequences here are brutal but not celebratory. The film refuses to glamorize Levon's violence. Instead, it lingers on aftermath, broken rooms, blood on hands, the tremor of breath after exertion. Levon is effective, yes, but never clean. His victories are messy, his triumphs costly. He does not walk away untouched. He staggers, scarred, his eyes haunted. This refusal to indulge spectacle turns the second half into something more profound. not a display of power, but meditation on the cost of wielding it. The girl's presence, even in absence, drives Levon. She becomes less a character and more a symbol of innocence, of what is worth saving, of the fragile goodness Levon wants to believe still exists. When he finally reaches her, bruised and terrified but alive, the moment is not triumphant but tender. The reunion is quiet, understated, a hand extended, a promise made. In that silence lies the heart of the film. Violence may save, but only love heals. Yet, the rescue is not the end. Villains do not crumble so easily. The second half escalates into a confrontation, not only with those who took the girl, but with the structures that allowed it. Levon faces men of power, men who mock his desire for peace, who sneer that he will always be a weapon, never simply a worker. Their words sting because they echo his own fear. And so the climax is not just physical but existential. Levon fighting not only enemies but the identity forced upon him. The final confrontation takes place in a construction site, a setting thick with symbolism, half-built structures surround him, beams rising like skeletons of a world unfinished. Here, Levon fights with the tools of both lives, fists honed in war and the hammer of a builder. The battle is savage, desperate, yet it feels mythic, as though he is tearing down one world to rebuild another. When the dust settles, he stands victorious, but not whole. Victory has cost him peace, anonymity, the illusion of being only a working man. The resolution is bittersweet. The girl is safe, her life restored to a semblance of innocence. Yet Levon's is not. He cannot return to invisibility. He has been seen, remembered, marked once more as a man he tried not to be. The film closes not with celebration, but with weariness. Levon picks up his tools again, but this time the hammer feels heavier. He has built safety for another, but torn away his own. This ending lingers because it refuses to be neat. Levon Cade is not redeemed by violence. He is scarred by it, even as it achieves good. He is not destroyed, but he is not healed. He endures, and perhaps endurance, in a world that constantly demands blood, is the most heroic act of all. What give a working man its weight are not only the events that unfold, but the people who carry them. Faces etched with weariness, voices shaped by grief, bodies carrying scars invisible to most. To sit with the characters is to understand that this film is not merely about violence and rescue, but about identity, dignity, and the fragile humanity hidden under layers of toughness. At the center is Levon Cade, embodied by Jason Statham, with a kind of weary gravity we rarely see from him. Levon is not the slick, untouchable hero of Statham's earlier films. He is older, heavier with history, his silence more eloquent than his fists. From the very first frame, we see a man who longs to be invisible, who wants his days to be measured in hours of labor rather than blood spilled. His character arc is built around tension. The soldier versus the builder, the man of war versus the man of work. He is reluctant, but never hesitant when action is required. That distinction matters. He does not crave violence, but when forced, he executes it with brutal precision. Statham conveys this beautifully, his eyes carrying guilt even as his hands do what must be done. Levon becomes a symbol of the impossible dream of peace after war, the paradox of trying to bury a self that refuses to stay buried. The kidnapped girl functions as both character and symbol. She is innocence endangered, yes, but also the embodiment of Levon's reason to fight. She is a spark that reignites his old instincts, but she is also the mirror through which we see his humanity. His tenderness toward her is a stark contrast to the brutality he inflicts on others. She represents hope, fragile, trembling, but worth every risk. Her arc is not about transformation, but about survival, about carrying innocence through fire. Opposite them stand the antagonists, men woven from greed, exploitation, and violence. They are not cartoon villains with elaborate schemes. They are ordinary in their cruelty, banal in their evil. This is what makes them chilling. Their motivations are profit, power, control. They exploit children, workers, women, anyone they can, embodying the systems of corruption Levon despises. Symbolically, they represent the world that denies dignity to the working man, the world that insists on consuming innocence for gain. In fighting them, Levon is not only saving the girl, he is rejecting the system that insists he is nothing more than a tool of violence. The construction workers who surround Levon add another layer. They are his community, his attempt at normality. Some respect him, sensing a depth they cannot name. Others mistrust him, wary of the scars that leak through his silence. They embody the ordinary man's perspective. Curious, suspicious, occasionally loyal, but never fully able to understand the burden Levon carries. They remind us that Levon is both part community and forever separate from it. Levon himself is the heart of the film's symbolism. His tools, his body, his silence, all carry meaning. The hammer he wields on construction sites is the clearest metaphor, a tool of building, of creating, but also a potential weapon. It symbolizes the duality of his life, to construct or to destroy, to live as worker or as soldier. Every time he picks it up, the question lingers, will it build or will it break? The girl symbolizes future. Without her, Levon's actions would feel like revenge. Through her, they become protection, sacrifice, hope. She is not simply the damsel in distress trope. The film gives her agency and her resilience, but most importantly, it uses her to reflect the possibility of innocence surviving even in corrupted worlds. The antagonists symbolize systems rather than individuals. They are the embodiment of exploitation, the faceless cruelty of men who commodify human lives. Levon's battle with them is not just physical, but thematic. A working man facing those who strip workers of dignity. A protector facing those who prey on innocence. By the film's end, these characters converge into a single truth. Levon Cade is no longer anonymous. He has saved, he has destroyed, he has endured. But he has also revealed that a man cannot escape himself. He can only carry both halves, builder and soldier, father figure and weapon, in uneasy balance. His character does not resolve neatly, and that is what makes him resonate. Every film has its secrets, its oddities that ripple beneath the surface, shaping what we see in ways the audience never realizes. With A Working Man 2025, the strangest lies not only in its narrative but in the stories behind its making, in the uncanny echoes that blur the line between fiction and reality. These strange facts become almost as compelling as the movie itself, deepening its myth and giving us new ways to see it. The first strange fact is the collaboration itself. David Ayer directed and co-wrote the film with Sylvester Stallone, adapting the novel Levon's trade. Ayer, known for his gritty street dramas, and Watch, Training Day, and Stallone, the legend of reluctant warriors, together crafting a story about a construction worker-turned-savior feels almost fated. Stallone himself has built a career on characters like Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, men shaped by violence yet longing for peace. To see him channel that ethos into Levon Cade through Jason Statham feels uncanny, as though Stallone is writing his own myth into another man's body. It's almost like Stallone handed Statham a torch. Now you carry this archetype. Another strange fact is how personal the role became for Statham. In interviews, he admitted that Levon Cade felt closer to himself than many of his past roles. He, too, comes from a working-class background, a man who once labored in anonymity before finding visibility. The title, A Working Man, resonates with his own identity, not glamorous, not untouchable, but grounded, defined by persistence. There's something surreal about watching him play Levon and realizing he is in many ways playing a version of his own life, only heightened into fable. The locations carried their own oddities. Much of the film was shot in gritty, real construction sites rather than built sets. Crew members recounted how shooting had to stop multiple times because actual workers wandered into frame, confused to see Statham swinging hammers instead of stunt doubles. One location in particular, an unfinished skyscraper, became infamous among the crew for its eerie atmosphere. Wind howled through hollow floors, lights flickered with no apparent cause, and one cameraman swore he saw a figure moving across scaffolding when no one was there. Whether coincidence or fatigue, the strangeness seeped into the mood of the shoot. Even the action scenes carried peculiarities. A sequence involving Levon fighting with improvised tools was reportedly choreographed on the spot, after a prop malfunction left actors without their planned weapons. Statham, ever professional, grabbed what was available, a wrench, a length of chain, and created a brutal, improvised fight that ended up in the final cut. The result is one of the rawest sequences in the film, and it only exists because of an accident. Once again, chaos becomes art. Music, too, has its odd backstory. Composer David Sardi drew inspiration from industrial sounds recorded on construction sites. The clang of steel, the hum of drills, the echo of hammers. These sounds were warped, layered into the score, so that when we hear tension rise in the film, we are literally hearing the voice of Levon's world. The working man's environment turned into music. It is subtle, but it means that the soundtrack itself carries the DNA of the story. Perhaps the strangest fact lies in the reception. Audiences expected another glossy Statham action flick, full of quips and choreographed spectacle. What they got instead was something slower, darker, more thoughtful, a meditation disguised as a thriller. Some walked out surprised, even unsettled, unsure how to respond. Others praised it as one of Statham's most layered performances, comparing Levon K to Rambo in First Blood, a character less about victory and more about survival, scars, and reluctant violence. That divergence in audience expectation is itself peculiar. A film marketed as action became conversation about philosophy. Even box office numbers carried strangeness. Release in March, a time often reserved for lighter fare, it managed to gross nearly $100 million worldwide, outperforming predictions. Analysts struggled to explain it. Some argued it was Statham's star power. Others pointed to the Stallone-Ayer collaboration, but many agreed that the story's working-class resonance tapped into something deeper. In a time when audiences are disillusioned with superheroes and CGI overload, the tale of a weary builder-turned-fighter felt refreshing. The strangeness here is that simplicity, not spectacle, carried the day. And perhaps the most haunting oddity, Stallone originally considered starring the film himself, adapting his own novel into a vehicle for his legacy. But as the years passed, he decided to step aside and hand it to Statham. The result is strange in its poetry. Stallone, the archetype of reluctant warriors, writing his final hymn into a younger man's career. It is a passing of torch that blurs fiction and reality, mentor and successor, myth and man. So when I think of the strangest fact about a working man, I don't think only of haunted skyscrapers, improvised fight scenes, or industrial soundscapes turned into music. I think of the way this film carries echoes of its makers, the way Stallone's myth lives inside Statham's performance, the way authenticity, accidents, delays, odd choices shaped its soul. The strangeness is not an accessory. It is the heart. This is a film born of accidents, inheritances, and uncanny parallels between fiction and life. And perhaps that is why it feels so alive, so raw, so unsettlingly true. When we shift from simply recounting the plot to pausing, reflecting, and examining its major events critically, a working man transforms from a gritty action thriller into something closer to allegory. Every beat, the abduction, the return to violence, the confrontations with corrupt power, carries meaning beyond its immediate thrill. The film asks us to see each event not as isolated action, but as commentary on dignity, labor, violence, an impossible dream of peace after war. The abduction of the girl is the film's first pivotal event, and critically it functions as more than a call to action. On the surface, it is a trope we know well. Innocence endangered, the reluctant warrior forced to fight. But looked at deeper, it is a metaphor for fragility of safety itself. Levon has tried to build a quiet life, but the abduction shows that safety in a corrupted world is always provisional, always fragile. Symbolically, the girl represents the very possibility of innocence in a violent world. To lose her is not just to lose a child, but to lose hope. Levon's decision to fight again is the second critical moment. It is not framed as triumph, not celebrated with soaring music. Instead, it is weary, inevitable, reluctant. He knows that once he steps onto that path, he cannot return to anonymity. Critically, this moment is less about one man saving one child and more about the tension between creation and destruction. Levon's hammer, his tool of building, is replaced with weapons of violence. The event embodies a paradox of human survival. To protect, we often must destroy. This moral contradiction is the film's most haunting refrain. The series of confrontations that follow, with kidnappers, with corrupt intermediaries, with institutions that enable exploitation, are framed as revelations rather than victories. Each fight is brutal, yes, but also exposes new layers of the world's decay. Critically, these events remind us that violence is never only personal. It is systemic. Levon is not battling a handful of villains, but a machinery of corruption that commodifies lives. In this sense, the fights are allegorical, one man's fist against the faceless weight of exploitation. The midpoint failure, when Levon saves some, confronts many, but realizes a girl is still captive, is crucial. It is a reminder that even relentless effort cannot immediately fix the world. Critically, this moment embodies a theme of endurance. Levon's power is real, but it is not omnipotent. He is strong, but he is also human, vulnerable, scarred. The event forces him and us to acknowledge that salvation is not quick or easy. It is grueling, painful, and incomplete. The climax at the construction site is perhaps the film's most layered event. On the surface, it is action spectacle. Levon facing the antagonist hammer in hand, violence erupting amid unfinished structures. But symbolically, the setting matters. A construction site is a place of building, of future-making. To stage the final battle, there is to make the fight itself an allegory. Can a man build while he destroys? Can creation and violence coexist? Levon fighting amid steel beams and half-built walls is not random. It is metaphor made concrete. He becomes both builder and destroyer, protector and weapon. Critically, the climax shows us that the working man is always caught in this paradox, creating with one hand, fighting with the other. Finally, the resolution, Levon saving the girl but losing his anonymity, is less closure than critique. He has succeeded, but at what cost? He cannot return to invisibility, cannot go back to being only a worker. He is once again seen, named, mythologized. Critically, this ending resists comfort. It insists that peace for men like Levon is never final. The working man, no matter how he tries, is always pulled into battles larger than himself. Survival is achieved, but wholeness is not. When we examine these events critically, the film reveals itself as a meditation on labor and violence. Levon is a construction worker, a man defined by building, by creating. Yet every event drags him back into destruction. The abduction forces his hand. The decision to fight shatters his attempt at peace. The confrontations expose systemic decay. The climax fuses building and breaking into one chaotic act. The resolution reminds us that violence, once returned to, cannot be easily put down. This is what makes a working man resonate beyond action. It is not only about whether Levon saved the girl, though he does. It is about whether a man can ever be free of his past, whether dignity can survive in a world that constantly commodifies innocence, whether peace is possible for those shaped by war. Every event answers with ambiguity. Yes, victories are won. But no, peace is not achieved. The world remains broken, and Levon remains scarred. And yet, there's a kind of fragile hope. In saving the girl, in refusing to abandon her despite cost, Levon proved that love and duty can still endure, that even a weary man, broken by history, can choose to protect. The critical weight of these events lies in that paradox. Destruction wielded for protection, violence embraced for the sake of love. The story insists on ambiguity, and in that ambiguity lies its truth. Behind the grit of a working man lies a production story just as layered as the film itself, a tale of unexpected collaborations, accidents that became art, and choices that reveal how a movie about dignity and violence was itself stitched together with equal parts struggle and inspiration. To explore these insights is to realize that the making of the film mirrors the themes on screen: work, endurance, compromise, and persistence against chaos. The first remarkable fact is the collaboration between David Ayer and Sylvester Stallone. Ayer, known for his gritty realism, and Stallone, whose name is synonymous with reluctant warriors, co-wrote the screenplay, adapting from Chuck Dixon's novel Levon's Trade. The strangeness of this partnership cannot be overstated. Stallone initially envisioned Levon Cade as a potential role for himself, almost an echo of his own archetypes: Rocky, Rambo, men shaped by violence who long for peace. Yet instead of starring, Stallone stepped back and handed the character to Jason Statham, effectively passing a torch from one era's action legend to another. On set, Stallone visited often, shaping tone and dialogue, quietly mentoring the film while leaving Statham to embody the role. Filming locations added their own peculiarities. Rather than relying on polished studio sets, Much of the film was shot on real construction sites and derelict buildings. This gave the film its raw, authentic atmosphere, but also created endless challenges. Crew members recounted the noise of actual machinery interrupting takes, wind howling through half-built structures, and real workers sometimes mistaking Statham for a foreman when he picked up tools between shots. The authenticity bleeds into the screen. When we see Levon Cade hammering beams, it does not feel staged because it wasn't. Statham insisted on doing much of the physical labor himself, blurring the line between actor and character. The action choreography carried its own strangeness. One of the film's most memorable fight scenes, Levon using improvised tools against his enemies, was reportedly born of accident. A set of planned prop weapons failed to arrive on time, so the stunt coordinator improvised with whatever lay around: a wrench, a length of chain, a construction plank. Statham embraced the challenge, choreographing with his stunt team in minutes. The raw, improvised fight was kept in the final cut, praised by critics for its grit. Once again, chaos became art. The score by David Sardi has its own fun fact. Instead of beginning with traditional orchestral arrangements, Sardi recorded ambient noises on construction sites: the clang of steel, the echo of drills, the rhythm of hammer strikes. These sounds were digitally warped and layered into the soundtrack, meaning the film's music literally carries the DNA of Levon's world. When audiences hear tension rising under a fight, what they are often hearing are the real tools of a working man, transformed into instruments of dread. Weather also became an unexpected collaborator. Several exterior scenes were delayed by sudden rainstorms. In one pivotal sequence, the skies opened unexpectedly, drenching cast and crew. Instead of reshooting in clear weather, Ayer decided to keep the storm. The rain became atmosphere, the drenched figures moving through mud and water, giving the scene a rawness impossible to stage artificially. The crew later joked that the weather was the film's most stubborn co-director. Behind the camera, tension and camaraderie coexisted. Statham, both star and producer, bore enormous responsibility. Some days he would be seen reviewing schedules and budgets between takes, then returning to set for physically grueling scenes. Cast members later praised his discipline, saying he set the tone for the crew: professional, relentless, but also unexpectedly warm in moments of exhaustion. One actor described evenings where Statham gathered the cast in trailers, cooking simple meals himself and telling stories from his early career, moment of family amid the chaos. Editing was another battlefield. The first cut of the film leaned heavily on action, delivering the spectacle audiences expected. But Stallone, watching early screenings, argued that it was missing the soul. He pushed for slower pacing, for silences between fights, for shots of Levon simply working, building, breathing. The editing team restructured entire sequences, letting grief and exhaustion linger longer than originally planned. The result is a film that feels less like adrenaline and more like bruised poetry. Even marketing had its quirks. Early posters highlighted Jason Statham in workman's clothes rather than in action poses, a risky decision in a market that often sells him as an unstoppable fighter. Producers debated this choice, worried audiences would expect less action. But the gamble worked. Audiences found themselves intrigued by the idea of Statham the Builder, only to be struck by the moral weight of the story when violence inevitably returned. And perhaps the most moving insight: during the final days of filming, Statham reportedly gave a speech to cast and crew, thanking them for enduring the grit and exhaustion of shooting in such unforgiving conditions. He called the project the hardest work of my career and the most honest. Many said they felt the film was not just about Levon Cade, but about themselves, about surviving long days, enduring hardship, holding each other up. In that way, the production itself mirrored the message of the story. That dignity is not in glamour, but in endurance, in persistence, in the stubborn refusal to give up. So when we look at A Working Man through the lens production, what we see is not a smooth machine, but a rough, imperfect collaboration of accidents, weather, improvisation, and stubborn will. And perhaps that is why the film feels authentic, because it was born in the same spirit it depicts: work, grit, endurance, and the fragile victories that emerge from chaos. Every story lives in its world, but in A Working Man the world is not mere backdrop. It is character, metaphor, and mirror. The setting, from construction sites to dim back alleys, shape Levon Cade as much as his past does. To pay attention to the cinematic elements is to realize that this film is not only about a man, but about the environments that surround him, the spaces where labor and violence blur together into a haunting kind of poetry. The first setting we encounter is a construction site. More than location, it is symbol. Half-built beams stretch in the sky. Scaffolding creaks under weight. Cement dust lingers in the air like memory. This is Levon's attempt at a new identity, a place of building, of creation, of honest work. Yet the same girders that hold up structures also echo prisons. The same tools that build can kill. The construction site thus becomes dual, a sanctuary and a battlefield. Creation and destruction fuse in one. Every time the camera returns to this space, we are reminded of Levon's paradox. The worker who cannot escape the fighter. The home environments are sparse, almost empty. Levon's living space feels temporary, as though he has never truly settled. A bare kitchen, a single bed, muted colors. Cinematically, this minimalism reflects his inner life. Stripped of comfort, holding on to only what is essential. When the kidnapped girl's belongings, drawings, small trinkets, briefly appear on screen, their color contrasts violently with Levon's muted world, showing us visually that innocence is what his life lacks and what he fights to preserve. Urban spaces carry another layer. Warehouses, alleys, and offices form the battlegrounds of the second act. They are shot with shadows that pool in corners, lights that flicker unpredictably, creating a visual tension where danger feels present even in silence. The cinematography lingers on details. Broken windows, trash scattered, the hum of neon signs. These images are not filler but mood, reminders that corruption festers not in fantasy, but in the real world we recognize. The villain's world is not abstract. It is our own cities, our own broken institutions, made slightly darker but never unrecognizable. Lighting is one of the film's most deliberate cinematic tools. Daytime at the construction site is warm, golden, deceptively calm. Yet the warmth is fragile, easily broken by interruption. By contrast, nighttime scenes are suffocating, not pitch black but dimly lit, with shadows that seem alive. This interplay reflects the film's theme. Peace is fleeting, danger lingers. Levon himself is often lit in half shadow, his face partially obscured, symbolizing the duality of man and myth, worker and warrior. The sound design heightens this duality. In construction sequences, we hear the clang of hammers, the grind of drills, the hum of engines, ordinary sounds of labor, yet amplified to almost musical intensity. Later, these same sounds bleed into fight sequences, blurring work with violence. The film even uses silence strategically. After brutal fights, sound often cuts out completely, leaving only Levon's breath. That silence is deafening, reminding us that violence does not end with impact, but with emptiness. Symbolically, the unfinished structures stand out most. They represent Levon himself. Incomplete, fragile, caught between what he was and what he tries to be. Steel beams with no walls echo his attempt at rebuilding life without true shelter. When the climax unfolds in one of these skeletal spaces, it is not random, it is metaphor incarnate. Levon's battle takes place inside himself, mirrored by the world around him. Half-built, half-broken, teetering between creation and collapse. The camera movement reinforces this. Early shots are steady, grounded, reflecting Levon's desire for stability. But as violence intrudes, the camera grows restless, handheld, shaky, claustrophobic. In fights, cuts are fast, breathless. Yet in aftermath, the camera slows, lingers on ruins, refuses to let us look away from consequence. This rhythm of movement teaches us how to feel. Tension, chaos, mourning. Even color palette tells story. Muted earth tones dominate Levon's world. Browns, grays, faded blues, the palette of labor, of dust and sweat. Villain spaces use colder tones. Sterile whites, metallic blues, evoking corruption disguised as order. And when blood appears, its red shatters the muted world, impossible to ignore. Cinematically, color is commentary. Labor is muted, corruption is cold, violence is vivid. The climactic construction site battle ties every element together. Steel beams frame Levon like a cage. Lights swing wildly. Shadows dance across unfinished walls. Sound mixes hammer clangs with gunfire, blending work and war until they are indistinguishable. The setting itself becomes metaphor for his life. He is building even as he destroys, fighting within structures that are incomplete, embodying the paradox of a working man who cannot escape battle. By the film's close, the settings linger as strongly as the characters. We remember the skeletal skyscrapers, the dim warehouses, the dust-filled silence of work sites. These are not generic backdrops. They are the film's soul, the language through which its themes are spoken. A Working Man is not only about Levon Cade, but about the environments that define him. Spaces of labor corrupted by violence, places meant to build turned into battlegrounds. And perhaps that is the most haunting cinematic truth. The world of the working man is never neutral. It always reflects power, struggle, endurance. It always carries the weight of what is built and what is broken. In Levon's story, the settings are not scenery. They are philosophy, turned concrete and steel. Every film lives two lives. The one projected on screen, and the one lived in fragment behind the camera. Long hours, accidents, improvisations, laughter, and exhaustion. With A Working Man, 2025, the behind-the-scenes story echoes the very themes of the movie: hard labor, endurance, and the impossibility of clean victories. To look into its making is to realize that the people creating it were themselves living a version of Levon Cade's struggle, pushing through chaos to build something lasting. The collaboration between David Ayer and Sylvester Stallone set the tone from the start. Stallone, who co-wrote the script, visited set frequently, quietly mentoring cast and crew. People describe his presence as almost ghost-like, not dominating, but lingering, watching, occasionally stepping in to refine a line or suggest a quieter beat. He spoke to Jason Statham often about playing weariness, not strength, encouraging him to embody Levon as a man tired of violence, not addicted to it. It's strange to imagine Stallone, forever linked with Rambo and Rocky, standing just out of frame while Statham carried the mantle, but that is what gave the project its layered authenticity. One warrior passing the torch to another. The locations provided as many challenges as opportunities. Shooting on active or half-abandoned construction sites meant dealing with unpredictable hazards. Crew recalled how real workers occasionally wandered onto set, mistaking cameras for safety inspectors, or how machinery suddenly roared to life mid-take. Statham himself, unwilling to fake labor, reportedly handled actual materials between shots, carrying beams, hammering nails. He wanted Levon Cade to look like someone who knew how to build. The authenticity cost the crew time, sweat, and bruises, but the result was a world that feels lived in rather than staged. The fight sequences carried their own behind-the-scenes legends. One of the film's most brutal scenes, Levon fighting with improvised construction tools, was not planned in detail. A shipment of prop weapons never arrived, leaving the team scrambling. Rather than delay, Statham and the stunt team improvised. They grabbed whatever was lying around: a wrench, a plank, lengths of chain. Choreography was done on the spot, filmed in just a handful of takes. What could have been disaster became one of the most praised sequences in the movie. Raw, inventive, utterly convincing. It was proof of the production's philosophy. Embrace chaos, turn it into art. The weather became another unpredictable collaborator. One climactic outdoor sequence was delayed repeatedly by sudden downpours. On the final attempt, the rain hit mid-scene, drenching actors and crew. Instead of cutting, air kept rolling. The result was a fight bathed in mud and water, with Statham slipping, grappling, claw his way through in conditions no stunt double would envy. Later, audiences praised the scene for its realism, unaware that the exhaustion and shivering they saw were not acted but lived. The storm became part of the movie's DNA. The cast dynamic added unexpected warmth. Despite the film's bleak tone, behind the camera there was camaraderie. Actors bonded over shared exhaustion, with Statham often gathering them for simple meals between takes. Stories circulated of him cooking pasta in trailers, offering wine, telling tales from his early days in cinema. These moments of laughter and intimacy contrasted with the grueling work, creating off-screen family that mirrored the on-screen themes of chosen bonds. The score's creation carried its own strangeness. Composer David Sardi recorded industrial noises directly from construction sites used in filming: drills, hammers, the metallic echo of scaffolding. These were digitally warped and layered into the soundtrack. What audiences hear as suspenseful music is, in part, the very sound of Levon's world. It is uncanny to realize that the film's music is literally infected with the DNA of its setting, blurring fiction and reality. The editing process was another battlefield. Early cuts leaned heavily on action, delivering what marketing teams expected from a Jason Statham vehicle. But Stallone, watching test screenings, argued that the soul was missing. He pushed for more silences, more close-ups of Statham's eyes, more weight and aftermath. The editing team reshaped entire sequences, slowing rhythm, letting weariness linger. The decision was controversial. Some fear it would alienate audiences craving spectacle. But the gamble paid off. Reviews praised the film for its depth, for allowing Statham to show vulnerability alongside brutality. Even the marketing campaign had its quirks. Posters initially depicted Statham not mid-punch, but holding a hammer, sweat-streaked, reflective. Producers worried it would undersell action, but the imagery struck audiences. This was not invincible Statham. This was working-class Statham, weary Statham. The gamble intrigued viewers, setting expectations for something more nuanced than standard action fare. And perhaps the most poignant behind-the-scenes moment came at the wrap. Statham, covered in dust and sweat after the final fight scene, reportedly gave a speech to cast and crew. He thanked them for enduring the chaos, for turning accidents into triumphs, for building something together against all odds. His words echoed Levon Cade's own ethos. Life is not about avoiding struggle, but about carrying each other through it. Crew members described the moment as deeply moving, a working man speaking to other working men and women, acknowledging that their labor, too, was dignity. So when we think of a working man beyond the screen, we find a production story as authentic as its narrative. A film shaped by accidents, storms, improvisation, and camaraderie. A film where authenticity mattered more than polish, where exhaustion became part performance, where chaos was not feared but embraced. Behind the camera, they lived the very message of the story. That dignity is not an ease, but an endurance. Every story is built on its themes, whether the audience notices them or not. A working man might dress itself in fists, hammers, and grit, but beneath the surface it is a fable about identity, about labor, about the impossibility of burying the past. Its symbolism runs through tools, settings, gestures, each one whispering truths larger than the plot itself. To peel them back is to see the story not as action but as allegory, a myth disguised as a thriller. The most obvious theme is the dignity of labor. Levon Cade is not introduced as a fighter, but as a builder, a man hammering beams, carrying wood, sweating in the dust of construction sites. His identity as a working man is not ironic but sincere. The film insists on showing us the beauty of ordinary labor before plunging us into violence. Symbolically, the hammer he wielded becomes a central motif, a tool of creation that can also be a weapon. Every time we see it, we are reminded of the tension between building and breaking, between peace and war. Tied to this is the theme of inescapable identity. Levon wants to bury his past, to exist in anonymity, to trade soldier for worker, but the past is relentless. The abduction of the girl drags him back into the shadows he thought he had left. This echoes a universal truth. No matter how much we try to reinvent ourselves, history clings. The scars, the instincts, the shadows, they never vanish, only wait. Symbolically, the construction sites, half-built and unfinished, reflect Levon himself. Incomplete, attempting to build new foundations but always vulnerable to collapse. The theme of violence as paradox pulses through every fight. Levon's violence saves, but also costs him peace. Each victory stains him, reminding us that violence, even when righteous, consumes. This duality is symbolized in the tools he uses. A hammer can build a home or crush a skull. A chain can hold beams together or strangle an enemy. The film symbolism insists that no tool, no act, no man is purely one thing. Violence protects and destroys simultaneously. The kidnapped girl becomes a symbol of innocence, of hope, of the future. She is not only a character to be saved, but an idea that there is still something in the world worth protecting. In Levon's hands, she represents the possibility of redemption, not for his past deeds, but for his present choice to fight again, not for glory, but for love. Critics have noted that she is less a person and more an emblem, and that is deliberate. She is a reminder that in a world of corruption, some things remain pure, and they are fragile enough to justify sacrifice. The villains symbolize systemic corruption. They are not flamboyant masterminds, but ordinary exploiters, banal in their cruelty. Their world is one of profit, greed, commodification of innocence. They embody the forces that deny dignity to the working man, that exploit labor and consume lives. In fighting them, Levon is not merely rescuing the girl. He is rebelling against the entire system that insists men like him can never be more than tools, never builders of their own destinies. The construction site climax is perhaps the film's richest symbol. Half-finished structures surround Levon, beams stretching into void, skeletons of buildings without walls. This setting mirrors his life. Unfinished, fragile, suspended between creation and destruction. His battle there fuses his two selves, the builder and the fighter, into one. Every blow he strikes is surrounded by the very structures he longs to finish but never can. The site becomes metaphor incarnate. The unfinished man fighting amid unfinished buildings, trying to hold creation and destruction in the same breath. Even sound and light carry symbolic weight. The clang of steel and hum of drills become music, reminding us that labor itself is song. The silence after violence reminds us that destruction always ends in emptiness. Lighting splits Levon's face into shadow and sun, symbolizing his dual identity. Half worker, half warrior. Color palette reinforces this. Muted earth tones for labor, cold blue for corruption, vivid red for violence that shatters all illusion of neutrality. But the deepest theme is endurance. Levon does not find peace. He does not erase his past. He does not walk into triumph. He endures. And endurance, the film insists, is its own kind of victory. The final images, Levon weary, scarred, but still standing, still holding the girl safe, symbolize that sometimes survival itself is the noblest act. It is not glory, not redemption, but persistence. So when we peel back the themes and symbols, we see that a working man is not just about one rescue. It is about the dignity of ordinary labor, the scars of past identities, the paradox of violence, the fragility of innocence, the corruption of systems, and the stubborn endurance of the human spirit. The hammer, the unfinished building, the child's small hand, these are not props but symbols. Together, they whisper the film's true message, that a build is harder than to destroy, that peace is fragile but worth the fight, and that even when the world drags us back into violence, there's dignity in choosing to endure. Cinema is built not only on story but on craft, the unseen hands that shape time, light, sound, and space into emotion. A working man is no exception. Its filmmaking techniques are not flashy for their own sake, but deliberate, chosen to echo the themes of labor, violence, and endurance. To study them is to see how the film itself was built like the structures it depicts, beam by beam, choice by choice, until something fragile yet solid emerges. The cinematography is restrained, almost austere. Wide shots of construction sites emphasize emptiness, half-finished structures rising like skeletons. These images place Levon Cade within a world as incomplete as he is. Close-ups linger on his face, showing not invincibility but weariness. The camera rarely indulges in stylized spectacle. Instead, it leans into rawness, handheld during fight sequences, to give them chaos, steady and patient during moment of labor. The contrast tells us that creation requires calm precision, while destruction is shaky, unpredictable. Lighting becomes a language of duality. Daylight on construction sites glows warm, almost golden, symbolizing Levon's attempt at honest life. Yet nighttime scenes are lit with sharp contrasts. Shadows swallowing corners, lights flickering as if unstable. This interplay reveals theme. Peace is fleeting, danger ever present. Levon himself is often shot half in light, half in shadow, a visual metaphor for the dual life he carries. Worker and warrior, builder and destroyer. The sound design is one of the film's strongest achievements. Industrial noises, hammers, drills, chains are woven into the audio landscape, grounding the world in authenticity. During fight scenes, these same sounds bleed into rhythm, as if violence itself has become an extension of work. Silence is wielded just as powerfully, After brutal sequences, the sound drops out, leaving only Levon's labored breathing. That silence is heavier than any explosion, forcing the audience to feel aftermath rather than adrenaline. Editing sculpts mood. Early scenes are slow, deliberate, cuts lingering to reflect Levon's desire for stability. But once the girl is taken, the pace quickens. Fight sequences are cut with breathless rhythm, disorienting yet visceral. And after each storm, editing slows again, showing aftermath, ruins, blood, exhaustion. This rhythm mirrors life itself. Long stretches of routine shattered by chaos, followed by heavy silence. It teaches the audience to live inside Levon's world. Work, collapse, endure. The action choreography is raw rather than polished. Statham fights not with elegance but with brutality, improvising with tools around him. Choreography emphasizes impact, weight, exhaustion. Each punch lands heavily. Each movement costs him something. This realism rejects spectacle in favor of credibility, reminding us that violence is never clean, always wearying. It aligns perfectly with the film's themes. Levon is not a superhero, but a man carrying scars. Performance technique elevates it further. Statham embodies Levon with restraint. His silence louder than his words. His body language conveys fatigue even when he fights. The supporting cast lean into realism rather than exaggeration, grounding the narrative in believability. Villains are chilling not because they cackle, but because they are ordinary, their cruelty quiet and casual. This restraint makes the story feel less like fiction and more like reflection of our own world. Now, the box office. Released in March 2025, A Working Man entered theaters with modest expectations. Analysts saw it as another mid-budget Statham action vehicle, likely to do steady but unremarkable numbers. Instead, it overperformed, earning nearly $100 million worldwide against a $40 million budget. Critics may have been divided, but audiences showed up, intrigued by marketing that emphasized the working man archetype over glossy spectacle. The relatability of Levon Cade, the grounded tone, and Stallone's name attached to the script all contributed to momentum. What's striking is how box office success mirrors the film's philosophy. It did not triumph with spectacle or CGI-heavy bloat, but with grit, craft, and authenticity. Audiences rewarded sincerity. They came not just for action, but for a story that respected their intelligence, that gave them something to feel and reflect upon. In an era of franchise fatigue, A Working Man proved that smaller-scale, character-driven thrillers could still resonate on the big stage. Critically, its reception was mixed. Some praised its thematic weight and Statham's restrained performance, calling it his most layered role in years. Others criticized pacing, finding its silences indulgent. But even critics who disliked its rhythm admitted its sincerity was undeniable. And at the box office, sincerity won. So when we study A Working Man through its filmmaking techniques and its performance in theaters, we see one truth. Craft and honesty matter. The film's choices, restrained cinematography, symbolic lighting, industrial soundscapes, raw editing, created a mood that aligned perfectly with its themes. And audiences, weary of hollow spectacle, rewarded it with attention, proving that even in a noisy cinematic landscape, there is still space for a story about a man with a hammer, a scar, and a reluctant heart. A film like A Working Man is carried not only by its story, but by the people who inhabit it, the actors who breathe life into its characters, and the audiences who respond with recognition or resistance. To study the cast, their reflections in interviews, and the voices of critics and fans is to see how this movie lived beyond its runtime, as dialogue, as confession, as mirror. At the center, of course, is Jason Statham as Levon Cade, known worldwide for roles that glorify precision, invincibility, and stoic cool. Statham brings something different here. In interviews, he admitted that Levon felt closer to his own life than any role in years. He's a man who works with his hands, who doesn't want trouble but can't avoid it. I know that man. I've been that man. Statham's working-class roots bleed through. He sells Levon not as myth, but as authenticity. Critics who once dismissed him as typecast acknowledge the performance as one of his most vulnerable. The fight scenes show strength, but the close-ups reveal weariness, guilt, tenderness. Audiences responded to this balance. Many reviews praise him for giving Levon a soul, not just fists. The supporting cast lent the story its texture. The young actress playing the kidnapped girl was singled out for her resilience on screen. Less damsel, more emblem of fragile innocence. In interviews, she spoke about working with Statham as like having a protective uncle on set, and critics noted that their bond felt lived in, never forced. Her presence provided the story's heart, grounding Levon's violence in tenderness. The villains, played by a mix of veteran and lesser-known actors, embodied corruption with chilling understatement. One interview revealed that the actors intentionally avoided caricature. "We didn't want mustache swirling," one said. "We wanted to show evil as ordinary, casual, systemic." Critics agreed. Their banality was what made them frightening. Audience reviews often noted, "They reminded me of real people, bosses, politicians, abusers hiding in plain sight." That recognition is what made them unsettling. Interviews with director David Ayer and co-writer Stallone shed further light. Ayer described his mission as telling a story about a man's dignity in a world that doesn't respect it. Stallone, in his reflective style, said, "Levon is every fighter who wants to put the gloves down, but never can. I know that man. I've lived him." These insights deepen the audience's reading. This wasn't just another Statham actioner. It was a Stallone parable, handed down, reshaped for a new generation. Audience reception reflected that duality. Some came expecting pure adrenaline, and left surprised by the film's slower rhythm and thematic weight. "I thought I was getting the transporter," one reviewer wrote, "but I got first blood instead." For many, that surprise was welcome. They praised the film as gritty, grounded, soulful. Others, accustomed to faster spectacle, called it too slow. But even negative reviews acknowledged Statham's performance as transformative. Fan responses were deeply personal. On forums, viewers wrote lines like, "I saw my father in Levon Cade. That look of exhaustion, that's every working man I've ever known." This isn't just Statham playing a hero. It's him playing all of us who get up and work every day. These confessions reveal how the film resonated not only as entertainment, but as identification. Levon Cade became a mirror for men and women who have labored invisibly, who have carried scars silently. Critics, too, were divided but engaged. Some called it Statham's most literary role, praising the restraint, the silences, the refusal to glamorize violence. Others wished for more spectacle, finding the tone uneven. Yet the very fact that critics debated it passionately proved its weight. Forgettable films inspire indifference. Resonant ones provoke arguments. Perhaps the most telling detail comes from audience interviews outside screenings. Many people, asked why they came, said they trusted Statham. He never phones it in. Others said Stallone's name on the screenplay intrigued them. But what they spoke about after was not pedigree but recognition. "I felt like Levon Cade was me, just a man trying to work, dragged into battles he never asked for." So when we consider cast interviews and audience reviews together, what emerges is not consensus, but dialogue. Statham brought vulnerability, supported by a cast that embodied innocence and corruption with equal truth. Critics debated its pacing, but acknowledged its honesty. Audiences claimed it personally, seeing themselves in Levon. In the end, a working man was not just watched. It was felt, argued over, and, in quiet corners, confessed as mirror. That is the mark of cinema that matters. And so, my dear friends, we close our journey into A Working Man 2025, a film that arrives dressed as an action thriller, yet lingers as something deeper, heavier, more haunting. It began with Jason Statham, hammer in hand, trying to disappear into the rhythm of labor, only to be dragged back into shadows. It ended not with triumph, not with redemption, but with endurance. And perhaps that is why it stays with us, because endurance, in our world as in Levon Cade's, is the truest kind of heroism. What this film has given us is not spectacle alone, though its fights are raw and unflinching. It has given us a parable about work, dignity, and the impossibility of bearing a past that refuses to die. It has reminded us that the tools we wield, hammers, fists, even love itself, can build or destroy depending on the hand that guides them. It has whispered that violence, no matter how noble its cause, consumes as much as it saves. And it has insisted that the dignity of the working man, so often overlooked, is worth centering in story, worth honoring in cinema. When I reflect on Leave On Cade, I do not see only Jason Statham, nor only Stallone's archetypes echoing through him. I see a myth familiar across time, the weary warrior who longs for peace but cannot escape the call to protect. Achilles in his tent, Cincinnatus at his plow, Rambo in the woods, now Levon on his construction site. Literature and film have always carried this figure, the man who wants only to work, but is summoned once again into battle. A working man places him in our own era, stripped of glamour, grounded in sweat, scars, and silence. The film's conclusion refuses neatness. Levon saved the girl, but loses his anonymity. He protects innocence, but sacrifices his own peace. He builds and destroys in the same breath, leaving us with a final image that feels less like victory and more like weary persistence. Yet that persistence is the heart. It tells us that survival, even scarred, is enough, that building, even when interrupted by breaking, still matters, that enduring, even without triumph, is itself a form of grace. For us, as viewers, the lesson extends beyond the screen. We, too, are working men and women in our own ways, building lives, carrying scars, dragged into battles we did not choose. We, too, know what it means to long for peace while fighting to protect what matters. And perhaps that is why this film resonates so strongly. Because in Leave On Cade, we recognize ourselves not as heroes untouched by struggle, but as workers enduring it. So what remains when the credits roll? Not adrenaline alone, not spectacle alone, but a reminder that dignity is found in labor, that love is found in protection, that scars are inevitable but endurance is still possible. A working man gives us not fantasy, but mirror. It shows us the nobility of survival itself. And as always, my friends, thank you for walking with me through this exploration. If the story unsettled you, if it mirrored your own exhaustion or reminded you of your own persistence, then it has done what great art must. If this reflection spoke to you, I invite you to stay in the circle, to like, to share, to subscribe, not for numbers but for community, because in this little space we too are builders of something fragile but true. Until the next story, my fellow lovers of literature and cinema, keep watching, keep working, keep enduring. For in a world that demands so much breaking, the act of building, of holding one another through darkness, is the most radical story of all.